I'm going to begin the story before slavery ended in the United States. I just want you to know that African Americans have participated in the medical field for as long as history goes, probably. But we actually had Dr. James Durham. He was born into slavery in 1762, and he bought his freedom and began his own medical practice in New Orleans, becoming the first African American doctor in the United States. As a youngster, he owned a number he got to meet a lot of doctors who taught him how to read, write, mix medicines, and serve and work with patients. Dr. Durham he had a flourishing medical practice in New Orleans until 1801. Can you believe that? When the city restricted his practice because he didn't have a formal medical degree. So in 1847, there was another doctor. His name was Dr. David Jones Peck, and he became the first African American medical student to graduate from a medical school in the United States. If you can remember back to that time frame, there was this whole thing about we're not going to educate these African Americans because we don't want them to know what's going on. Okay? Yes. So we're going to keep them as dumb as we possibly can. Don't give them any reading. Don't teach them to write. And we'll tell them what they should do and what they should respect. And so if you can imagine that we've got two doctors that actually went through medical school and actually became doctors at that point in time. All the way into 1852 in Atlanta, Georgia, the Jackson Street Hospital was established as the first institution of record solely to care for colored patients. The founders were a group of charitable-minded whites led by Dr. Henry Fraser Campbell, the University of Georgia, the School of Medicine there, and there were no colored staff at that time. Okay? So just trying to give you an idea of where we were at. See if I got this turned back on again, and we'll go forward. This young man here, he was born into slavery in 1813. His name was James McClune Smith. He set his sights on becoming a doctor, and he was denied admission to any American colleges because he was black. He was unable to attend, or was able to actually attend the University of Glasgow in Scotland, where he earned his bachelor's, master's, and medical degree by the age of 24. Okay. Dr. Smith returned to New York in 1837. He established his own medical office and pharmacy on West Broadway, making him the first African American doctor with his own practice in the United States. So as a physician, he treated both black and white patients, and he also served as a chief doctor at the New York City Colored Orphan Asylum. He devoted much of his life to working with abolitionists to end the enslavement of black people in the South. He died about 3 weeks before the passage of the 13th Amendment. Civil War, like you said, there were 8 doctors in the United States military at that time, 8. There were 163 regiments, about 1,000 men each, that were African American that fought during the Civil War. All right, and I tell a nice little presentation on that. But Dr. Alexander Thomas Augusta is the highest ranking African American officer in the Civil War. He leaves the military at the end of the war and is a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. Okay? Interesting about him, he became the first black medical professor at one of the original faculty members at the newly formed medical college at Howard University. So the Freedman Hospital during the Civil War is the hospital that he was able to open at the end of the Civil War. and it's now the Friedman Hospital, but it's also a part of the University of Howard University, okay? He didn't live very long. He actually lived until 1890. And he was the first black officer that was buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
Interesting. Isn't that amazing?
And again, a lot of you don't know, there were nurses, okay? There were black nurses, but they were not really allowed to be nurses. Nursing was not a woman's job before the Civil War, but in 1865 there were over 3,000 women nurses serving the war effort. African American women were not included in that number, nor were they recognized for their service for decades to come. Some were paid, but most were not. They served as nurses in convalescent homes and government hospitals. The United States Navy enlisted several nurses on a hospital ship, the USS Red Rover. And a little history on the USS Red Rover: it was a converted Confederate paddle-wheeled steamer that was captured and turned into the first Navy hospital ship under the direction of the Sisters of the Holy Cross. Anne Bradford Stokes is well known as an African-American woman who served as a nurse on the USS Red Rover from January 1863 to October 1864. She was one of the first women to enlist in the Navy and to serve as a nurse. Later, she became the first woman to apply for and be awarded a pension for her military service. Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler. She earned a place in the New England Female Medical College in 1860. The school was the first in the country to train women doctors. At the time, many men argued that women were too delicate or not intelligent enough to be doctors. Most medical schools barred black students regardless of their gender. The school initially trained women to work only as midwives, but as the time that Crumpler attended, the curriculum had been expanded to encompass more complete medical education. So she became a doctor in 1864, and she was the first female African-American doctor. And her official degree was Doctoress of Medicine. And she practiced in Boston, but by the end of the Civil War, she found herself drawn to Richmond, Virginia. There were historical black colleges. Everybody knows that they exist, right? Nashville, Tennessee is the home to 4 historical black colleges and universities, which include Tennessee State University, Fisk, Meharry College, and American Baptist College. And we'll talk a little bit about Meharry here in a second. Meharry was established in 1876 to teach former slaves in the healing arts. They were dedicated to the eliminating health disparities through education, research, and patient care. Under the backdrop of racial exclusivity, membership in the American profession organizations, including the American Medical Association, the AMA, was restricted to whites only. The AMA determined the medical policy for the country and played an influential role in broadening the expertise of physicians. When the group of black doctors sought membership in the AMA, they were repeatedly denied admission. Subsequently, the National Medical Association, the NMA, was created for black doctors and health professionals who found it necessary to establish their own medical societies and hospitals. The National Medical Association was established in 1895 during the era of U.S. history where the majority of African Americans were disenfranchised. The segregation policies of separate but equal dictated virtually every aspect of our society. So this is that piece of history that you need to understand when you talk about the doctors that came to Pueblo. The NMA is the oldest and largest organization representing African American physicians and health professionals in the United States. It extended the equal rights and privileges to all physicians, not just the African American, but all physicians. Although the NMA has led the fight for better medical care and opportunities for all Americans, its primary focus targets health issues related to minority populations and the medically underserved. Collectively, they have over 30,000 African American physicians and patients that they serve. National discrimination policies in the 1900s. Discrimination policies manifested countless examples of inadequacies of segregated health care system. The question was how to eliminate disparities in health and obtain professional medical care for all people. Racism in medicine created and perpetuated poor health outcomes for Black and other minority populations. In the South, hospitals' accommodations were frequently substandard. If Blacks were admitted to the general hospitals at all, they were relegated to all Black wards. In some instances, white nurses were prohibited from caring for Black patients. Conditions in the North were also inequitable. It is reported that as late as 1912, only 19 of New York City's 29 hospitals would admit Black patients, and only 3 gave Black physicians the right to tend to their patients to perform operations. Black Communities it was written by Warren Fortsum in February of 1980. He talks about the history of Pueblo's Black community. And he did a presentation, and that presentation was actually put into words and published. He said, Blacks were in part of the westward movement of people in the United States, with General Palmer in founding Colorado Springs. Mm-hmm. He records that there were many happenings of Black soldiers during the Civil War, and the 10th Cavalry organized in 1866, which, by the way, is the unit that I represent with the Buffalo Soldier Organization in Brighton. Most Blacks came west seeking employment, of course. By 1870, there were many Blacks employed in industry, but also they were cooks, maids, stonemasons, porters, saddle makers, barbers. They came from Georgia, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, and Texas. By 1880, almost 2% of Pueblo's population was Black. In 1890, the percentage increased to 2.87%, and in 1910, the Black population increased to its highest level of 3.2% of Pueblo's population. It was noted that Pueblo's Black community was larger than that of Colorado Springs or El Paso County, all of Colorado Springs area. It was stated that in the early days, Pueblo had little residential segregation. Blacks lived in Pepper Sauce Bottom, on Goat Hill, and in downtown Pueblo. The 1921 had a severe impact on all of the communities, but especially downtown Pueblo. Pepper Sauce Bottom, by the way, if you don't know, is adjacent to the Midtown Shopping Center. Okay, the Modest Means area was wasn't wiped out, but it was the homes were left awash with water and mud in both basements and on main floor areas. Richard Corwin, medical doctor. So I think some of you came with the thought that I'm going to talk a lot about Richard Corwin. We'll talk a little bit about it. In 1880, Colorado Coal and Iron Company, the forerunner to CF&I, hired Dr. Richard Corwin to come to Pueblo and set up a medical department. The first CF&I hospital was built on the grounds of the company's Minnequaw plant and acquired that name. Typhoid epidemic among the steelworkers in 1882 overwhelmed the small facility and led it to the construction of the new 30-bed hospital. In 1902, Minnequaw Hospital was reborn in a form of a new 200-bed facility located near Lake Minnequaw. Upon the death of its founder, Dr. Corwin, in 1929, the hospital changed its name to Corwin. Although there's some speculations that Dr. Corwin recruited black doctors to come to Pueblo to treat their own kind, I saw no real evidence in the newspapers or anywhere that substantiated that fact. Speculations were also made that Dr. Corwin opened the CF&I hospital doors to black doctors. And again, I saw no evidence of him doing that. I'd love to hear it if he did, in fact, but I don't. I wasn't able to see any correlation of the black doctors that came to Pueblo and Dr. Corwin opening the doors to the hospitals to let them come in and treat patients. Now, I'd like to know if I misread that or I didn't read the right articles. I'd love to hear that, but that's the evidence that I've found so far. The one thing that in my research that I was able to confirm is that all CF&I employees were treated by the medical department at the company hospital, and they were treated pretty equally from what I could tell. So they took care of their own, is basically what I got from that, okay? In February of 1980, Warren Fulsom did a program. I think I did this. I said that before. Okay, I know what I did. Okay, Warren Fulsom did a program entitled A History of Pueblo Black Community. I was able to identify 3 of the 6 names provided here. So he talked about Dr. T.H. Lee, Dr. Red, Dr. Cobb, and then he gave dentist names of Dr. Clarence Holmes, Dickerson, and Dickerson had no first name, neither did Dr. Washington. So I wasn't able to find them in Ancestry to confirm that they were here. I did find Dr. Clarence Holmes, Dr. Red, and Dr. Cobb. The first name up there, Dr. T.H. Lee, I see no records at all indicating that there was a Dr. T.H. Lee in Pueblo. Just the view of downtown Pueblo around 1900, right? This is Main Street going into Union Avenue. Just to kind of set your sights on where we were. Because in 1902, the first black doctor that I was able to find, Dr. Samuel Alfonso Huff, came to Pueblo. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was born on January 10th, 1879 in Tennessee, grew up on a farm in Alabama. At the age of 23, graduated from Meharty Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. And in 1902, he came to Pueblo. He opened his physician and surgeon practice at 416 and a half West Northern Avenue, excuse me. 416 and a half West Northern Avenue. And in 1904, he married Lillian Bell, or Lily Bell. He enjoyed a large practice among the people of his race and became a part owner of a drugstore at 402 West Northern Avenue around 1906. Dr. Huff was active in his community. He was asked to join and lead several organizations. He delivered speeches in Denver, Colorado Springs, and in Pueblo. He was highly respected throughout the black community. And this says he was invited to welcome the folks to an official program of the Grand Lodge of Colorado Jurisdiction Knights of Pythias. Okay? How is it spelled? How's it? Pythias. Okay. It was really neat because even though he's the first African American doctor that I was able to locate, there's more written about him than all the rest of the doctors combined. Okay? On April 16th, 1907, the Pueblo chieftain reported that Dr. Samuel Alfonso Huff was appointed the Pueblo police surgeon. Isn't that cool? Dr. Huff will spend most of his time at the City Hall in readiness preparations, and he handled all emergency medical cases. It was thought that Pueblo's size could justify the appointment of a surgeon. There was also a black janitor at City Hall and 2 policemen that were African American at that time, and it was in recognition of the black vote. 2 years, on May 10th, 1909, the Pueblo Sun reported that the police surgeon position was abolished. Dr. Huff is out, and the county health commissioner has assumed his duties. On May 15th, the Indicator, which is another paper, indicated that Mayor Fugard had eliminated the police surgeon position to save the city money. This was Pueblo's loss. Dr. Huff planned to leave the city. The Statesman, Volume 22, December 24th, 1910. Formerly a prominent physician and surgeon of Pueblo, Colorado, Dr. Huff has spent the last few months visiting the hospitals and clinics of the East, and with new ideas now comes to work among us. The doctor will be found at his new office and residence at 512 26th Street. He is a prominent in the Knights of
Pythias.
Pythias. Okay, that was a word I couldn't quite get figured out. Pythias circles, and while in Pueblo, he was marked for his zeal and energy. He will make a splendid addition to the professional Denver society there. So an advertisement, this is an advertisement that was in the newspaper. This is in the Denver Star, and this was actually just pulled from April 5th, 1913. So Pueblo had a wonderful doctor. He had a great practice. He became the police surgeon, the city surgeon, and a couple of years later they let him go, and he said, "See ya." Okay? He wasn't the only doctor here at that time. But I'll introduce the next one here in a second. This just happens to be his registration card for the draft. And Dr. Huff died on September the 11th, 1929, the same year as Dr. Corwin. And he was buried at Fairmont Cemetery in Denver. Rudy, hoo-hoo. And a quote for Dr. Huff was written in the Denver Star newspaper. It says, "Dr. S.A. Huff, popular physician, uplift work and character building, whose efforts were directed towards, was head of Elks in their heyday." This doctor here, I've got his photos here. This is Dr. Simon Peter Douglas. Dr. Simon Peter Douglas came to Pueblo in 1905. So 2 black doctors in the city at the time. And established his medical physicians and surgeon practice with his wife, Susie B. Wheaton Douglas, and they lived at 113 and a half and 124 and a half South Main, or South Union Avenue, excuse me. How about that? Right down on Union, guys. In 1909, he moved to 1011 East Ormond Avenue. And again, I don't have a lot of history about what they did while they were in Pueblo, medically, but I do have stuff that I was able to find in Ancestry. In 1904, and this is a diversion, okay? I got to take you to the Pueblo Hospital and the fact that it became a part of the orphanage for the African American population here. So in 1904, the Federation of Colored Women's Club established a colored orphanage and an old folks association. In 1906, they were able to secure the old Pueblo Hospital, a brick building at 306 East 1st Street on the top of Tenderfoot Hill. Anybody know where that's at? It's up on top of Goat Hill, right? It's where the Enterprise Rent-A-Car. Yeah. Okay.
That's where this hospital.
That's where the hospital was. That's the first hospital in Pueblo there. The reason that I make this tie is because Dr. Douglas served as a physician on the advisory board for this orphanage. Okay? He also later became the Sunday school superintendent for the orphanage. And so I thought that was kind of cool to be able to add this. Okay? The Pueblo Sun, in November the 10th, or number 10, was written on March 12, 1908. It says that a colored Republican club was organized at a meeting held at 121 Grand Avenue last evening. Officers elected were Dr. S.P. Douglas as the president. So he was involved in our community, deeply involved with the African American population in the community. And if you can relate to the fact that I'm the president of the Pueblo Martin Luther King Holiday Commission, which was on Grand Avenue, and we were in the building that the orphans and old folks lived in from 1914 to 1963. So he helped found that and was a major part in that orphanage. These are some of the old folks that lived around in Pueblo. Some of these guys, or all of these folks, were actually former slaves that had relocated to Pueblo. Some of them actually stayed in the orphanage, okay, when they became old and feeble. As a matter of fact, the gentleman on the far right, the taller man, he was actually a veteran of the Civil War. And I could think of his name, but I can't think of it right at the moment. When the flood happened, that his wife was killed and that he gave up his business. That's not what I found in the newspapers. He was an African-American, successful black businessman, had his own furniture store on Union Avenue. It's still there, the building's still there. This is Sam Nelson. He rebuilt his business after the Great Flood. His wife, Maddie, died 6 years later. She didn't die until 1927 and is buried at Roselawn Cemetery. So this guy here, this guy is Dr. Jackson Silas Cobb, and he was born on September 13th, 1889 in Vienna, Georgia. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree from Payne College in Augusta, Georgia, and his medical degree from Jane Terriell Medical School in Memphis, Tennessee. He began his medical practice in Pueblo in 1923. So he'd be the third African-American doctor that I was able to locate. Poor picture of him, but this came right out of the newspaper. This came from the Denver Star. The Denver Star on May 25th, 1935. And in this, they talk about Governor Johnson sent the following letter naming delegates from Colorado. It gives me great pleasure to advise that I have this day appointed you as a delegate to represent the state of Colorado in the celebration of the National Negro Day in 1935, to be held in conjunction with the California Pacific International Exposition in San Diego. The delegates named were Dr. Jackson Silas Cobb. There was a lot of ties between him and Sam Nelson during the times that they were there, and quite honestly, both of them were very influential. He married Bessie Hall on April the 29th, 1925, here in Pueblo. Dr. Cobb, in the Colorado Voice, and by the way, these are all historical Colorado newspapers, and I just happened to, I had to go through one article at a time and try to read all the small print to try to figure out what was going on there. But in August 13th, 1948, Dr. J.S. Cobb of 1216 East Evans, Pueblo, Colorado, is our prominent physician. His office is at 1213.5 East Evans, and in a two-story flat building, which he also owns. His practice extends to the different races throughout the city. He is well known in business and civic and political circles. Mrs. Cobb and Dr. Cobb recently returned from an extended business pleasure trip. The trip extended to the West Coast, then to Vancouver, British Canada. In Seattle, they successfully closed 2 business deals with financial benefits. The trip was quite a pleasurable trip for them, and that was made in a gleaming new 1948 Cadillac sedan. Really cool. This guy was successful, right? And what made it even better was it said that when he was in Vancouver, he met Robert Miller, a staunch friend of Paul Robeson. Anybody ever hear of Paul Robeson? Yeah. By whom they were entertained. They're welcoming them back home by their many friends. I thought that was so cool. Dr. Cobb was active until his death. He was also the assistant county physician in Pueblo for 16 years. He was the past officer and lifetime member of the NAACP. Dr. Cobb was very active in politics and in the community. On October the 6th, 1965, at 81 years, he suffered a stroke and died at St. Mary Corwin Hospital. He was survived by his wife Bessie and was buried in Pueblo's Mountain View Cemetery. Dr. Clarence Fitzhugh Holmes, our first dentist. Okay, he came or was born in 1892 in Denver, Colorado. I think this is a cool story. His parents moved from Washington, D.C., but he grew up on Curtis Street and attended Manual High School in Denver. Then he went to Howard University and the Howard University College of Dentistry in Washington, D.C. Clarence Holmes opened a dental practice in Denver, in the Five Points neighborhood. While not the first licensed African-American dentist in Colorado, a distinction that belongs to a Dr. Emmett McLean, who became a licensed dentist in 1907. He did open a practice there. It was until, 1923 that he left Denver and came to Pueblo. 1923. And, 1926 he came to Pueblo and returned to Denver in 1931.